I was wrong about Xenoblade Warriors. For those who aren't in the know, a few years ago I made this video called I Fear Xenoblade Warriors. Because despite all the Xenoblade fans and a lot of the general Nintendo fans, I am not excited by the idea of a Xenoblade Warriors. I especially don't think it's likely to exist, but even if it did, I don't think it would be remotely as exciting as people are fantasizing in their heads. And that's not coming from the perspective of someone who just automatically hates on Musou games, which is valid, by the way. I am someone who grew up with Musou games. I continue to enjoy them today. It was the perspective of someone who actually kind of knows what they're talking about, and thus has a realistic idea of what that game would possibly be. And so I just wanted to let everybody know that maybe don't get ahead of yourselves. Just because you played one or two of the Nintendo Musou games does not mean you should be head over heels about what Xenoblade Warriors could be. Because it could easily be underwhelming. Especially for us Xenoblade fans who really prioritize story. I know Xenoblade fans will probably say, well, I just want to get the cool fan service and see all the characters. No, you don't. Be honest. Be honest with yourself. If the story is just fine, you will be critical of it. You're a Xenoblade fan. Be honest with yourself. But something happened recently that made me change my tune. It's not like I've completely 180'd on my opinion, but I can now see that, yeah, it could actually be great. And that something is none other than Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. Just to quickly give you some background in case you're out of the loop, this game's predecessor was Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, and as soon as it was announced, there was a collective excitement and intrigue from the Nintendo community, because even if you weren't a Musou fan, it was just mind-blowing, honestly, to see a Musou game look so authentic to what Breath of the Wild was, and also just the mere fact that it was a prequel. That meant that we were going to go through the tragic backstory, the heartbreaking story of Zelda and the champions in the past. That alone was worth buying into. But then it turned out that that's not quite what the game is. As soon as it begins, it kind of tells you that it's going a different direction. And because of that, it resulted in a lot of resentment and bitterness that continues to be relevant today. Because I have seen such a lack of enthusiasm around Age of Imprisonment. And that's for a few reasons, one of which is just, we've had a couple of these Nintendo Musou games already. The novelty's wearing off. Like, I think many people have realized that they actually don't enjoy these games. But, like I said, it's also because it carries the burden of Age of Calamity, where people, they just refuse to have faith. Even though Nintendo explicitly stated that this game would be canon, there's just a lot of people who refuse to believe it. They remain skeptical. They don't want to be betrayed again. And well, I'm here to tell you, as someone who just recently beat Age of Imprisonment, that game is the real deal. Genuinely, Age of Imprisonment has the best story I have ever seen in a Musou game. And I know the bar may be low, but there's a couple of people who have played it who are starting to say, wait a second, I kinda just wish this story was in Tears of the Kingdom. And I don't necessarily agree with that, because that would just add so many more cutscenes, and a lot of them aren't even really relevant to Link's goal, his own journey. But regardless, the fact that there's some people who are saying that, that speaks volumes to how worthwhile and substantial and well executed the story is in Age of Imprisonment. I'm not saying it's some sort of masterpiece, don't get me wrong, but its story is way better than any spin-off, and most especially a Musou game, ever deserved to have. Now that then begs the question, how does this all relate to Xenoblade Warriors? Is it just because you like the story in Age of Imprisonment that you would have faith in Xenoblade Warriors' story? Well, the short answer is yes, but the long answer is Yes, but in very specific ways. A lot of the complaints and concerns that I had about Xenoblade Warriors were kind of addressed in Age of Imprisonment. First of all, it's important to note that this is now the closest idea we have to what Xenoblade Warriors would be. Previously, I considered it to be Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes, because that was built upon the lore of 3 houses. But the problem with that game is that not only is it not canon, it's a whole alternate timeline, a whole what-if scenario. I'm not saying Xenoblade Warriors couldn't be that, but most likely, especially when you look at what fans have proposed, most likely it would be its own original non-canon story, or somehow it would be canon, in which case, most definitely, it would most relate to Age of Imprisonment. Of course, there's gotta be some creative liberties in there. It's a Musou game, we gotta be over the top, but for the most part, Age of Imprisonment sticks to the pre-established lore. It sticks to the guidelines. It sticks to the standards. That's ideally what we would want out of a Xenoblade Warriors. Whether or not it's canon, we want that lore to be respected and valued, right? I would hope so, at least. And the thing is, Age of Imprisonment respects the source material so much that it directly affects the gameplay. I would not say that Age of Imprisonment is a Musou game for everyone. It's probably one of the most unique, because everything, like literally from its mechanics to the map design, is very much based on the storytelling. So for example, the levels, they're a lot more linear than you would expect from your standard Musou affair. And that's because there's a lot of urgency. It's not just, hey, go around and no, we gotta get somewhere. There's a lot of urgency because that's just innately part of the story they're telling. Another element, which I really respect, is the roster. Usually you would expect this all-star cast, even if it doesn't make sense, just throw them in there, but Age of Imprisonment doesn't do that. In fact, like half of the roster is a bunch of nobodies, and I don't mean that in an insulting way. It's like literally people you just stumble across. They're just people who happen to be part of the war. But that's what sort of enhances the story, because this isn't a war that they had been planning for, and you had all these famous generals training for months and months. No, this is a war that came out of nowhere. It put Hyrule into this massive hysteria, and so yeah, a lot of the party members are just people trying to survive, and you happen to come across them, and they're like, hey, yeah, I'm gonna join you, because otherwise, I'm fucking dead. There's just so many things like that that are antithetical to your standard Musou game, and because of that, sure, maybe some Musou fans aren't gonna enjoy the game as much, but hey, you know what? In exchange, it elevates the stakes. It truly conveys that desperation and that tragedy. It goes against what you'd expect from a Musou game in order to properly tell its story. And again, I would hope that Xenoblade fans would want that. I would hope that we're not just looking for a standard Musou game. Not that that would be bad, but if you could make it, if you could shape it in a way where it actually is appealing to the type of storytelling we'd see in Xenoblade, then hell yeah, that sounds way more exciting to me than some throwaway crossover. And honestly, I know this is gonna sound so Xenoblade fangirly. There were cutscenes in Age of Imprisonment where I thought to myself, this is a real thought I had, wow, if they're willing to do this in this game, then they can definitely do that in Xenoblade Warriors. Because Xenoblade cutscenes are a different level of hype. As we all know, compared to your average game, even your average JRPG, there's just a different level of cutscene production and direction. And Age of Imprisonment has way more quality cutscenes than your average Musou game. Usually Musou games just have like short cutscenes that, they're just there to get the plot going. They went the extra mile for Age of Imprisonment. So assuming Xenoblade Warriors did happen, and they did actually give a shit about it, then yeah, now I think it's relatively safe to expect that they would have a similar level of quality for those cutscenes. But what is most impressive of all, what truly inspired this video, is the thing that I've always disliked about Musou games. The OCs. Koei Tecmo always has to have their OCs. Even when nobody wants them, nobody ever asks for them, they always throw them in there. It's not just a fan service title, we gotta have some original characters because otherwise, how is the story gonna happen, yada yada yada. Now to be fair, I do like some of the OCs. They aren't all misses, but they typically are bland and generic, and unfortunately, they tend to be important. I think the best example of the duality of OCs is Fire Emblem Warriors 3 Hopes, because you have the main OC, that being Shez. I'm a big fan of Shez, I gotta say, especially female Shez, but then you have their partner. I don't even remember their name, honestly. Is it Aardvark, something like that? I did not like them at all. Like, not a single of the slightest bits of damns were given about this character. I straight up didn't like them. And that's the problem, where you're coming into this game for the source material, right? But instead, it keeps shoving these OCs at you, because they have to be the driving force of the story. I am so serious when I say that you better expect Xenoblade Warriors to do the same damn thing. But you should be a bit more optimistic about it after Age of Imprisonment, because this game has two very important OCs, and when they first appear, you might get the same feeling that I had, of like, wait a second, I didn't come to this game for you. But then, it turns out that for once, the term OC should be in quotation marks, because Calamo and the Construct are so valuable to the story. They are two characters that aren't just made up in order to have a plot, in order to have an excuse for this game to exist. No, those are two characters that are so faithful to the source material. They are so purposeful. They build upon the pre-established lore in ways that I never even imagined. Like, take the Construct for instance. You take one look at them and it's like, oh, they're just an excuse to have some fashion of Link to be playable. And yeah, that's probably true, and normally, they would just leave it at that. That's all they had to do, right? But instead, you learn the truth behind this character. And it is something so damn clever that, first of all, I would be shocked if anybody in the world correctly predicted it. And secondly, it's so clever that it feels like it was always meant to be. Like, whether or not that's the truth, the fact that I'm even saying that, the fact that I feel like they wrote this while they were writing Tears of the Kingdom instead of just afterwards, that is the level of how organic these quote-unquote OCs are. And it's not just the reasoning behind them, it's not just the logic, it's also how they elevate everything else. Because when... it's hard to explain without spoilers, I'm so sorry, but if you know the details, if you really think about what the Construct means in terms of the power of the Master Sword, in terms of the power of Link, in terms of the power of Ganondorf, and most importantly to this game, reaffirming Raru's belief in his own character arc. Like, I just listed so many ways that this one character contributes to the story of Tears of the Kingdom. Calling them an OC is disrespectful. That's why I put the quotes around it. And so, with all that being said, now that I can see that, okay, yeah, OCs, typically bland, typically generic, but there is some hope. There is some hope, and if there is any game that would actually have a good OC that, similarly to the Construct, elevates the story of the source material, I can easily see it being Xenoblade, because we all know the consistency of how good those characters and those stories are. So, in conclusion, was this all just a giant advertisement for Age of Imprisonment? Yes, but also I was indeed wrong about Xenoblade Warriors, and I felt like I needed to own up to that. I'm sure many of you would still be okay if it was a silly throwaway crossover, and that's all well and good, nothing wrong with that, but personally, I've just always wanted more from this franchise. I think it deserves more, and now with Age of Imprisonment, I've realized that, hey, maybe it could get more. This game showed me that they're willing to break the formula, they're willing to break these tropes, and just break the mold in order to directly improve the story, and to better the source material, instead of just relying on it, instead of just having this for fun game that you won't think about in a month, you know? I'll tell you, next year, I'm gonna be thinking about Age of Imprisonment, because I'm still in shock. I'm still in shock about how good it is. That's all I was asking for, really. I just want Xenoblade to always be memorable in ideally a positive way. And now, I can no longer doubt your hopes and dreams and fantasies about Xenoblade Warriors, because, yeah, I'm realizing that it could be positively memorable if it did happen. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. I hope you are enjoying the impending holiday season, and if you're not, maybe you're spending it alone, just know that you're loved, and I'm proud of you. You could be somebody's construct, you just haven't realized it yet, okay? I'll see you next time, if that made any sense to you. Alrighty, bye bye!